So, is there a question or two from the audience?
阿北现在的问答要问你几个问题了。观众要问问题。
Yeah. And we'd be happy to ask either in Chinese or in English, and we're going to transmit it to him somehow. Let's see, microphone.
因为老师比较紧张。
黄老师I just want to say. Huang Lao, I just want to say that I'm a big fan of yours, and I've been reading your stuff since middle school. And your writing actually opened up our eyes and our minds back then, because at that time we were mainly reading most of the Mandarin writers like Huang, or like Chun-ming, or Chun-ming, Chun-ming. But your writing back then opened a new possibility for us to understand that Taiwanese literature can be as important as Chinese literature, Mandarin literature back then. But I'm just curious that at that time, how does it feel to be a Taiwanese writer among all those big names, Chinese writers? I would consider back then the Mandarin writers were mainstream and Taiwanese literature was just starting up. So I'm just curious back then, how does it feel to be a young Taiwanese writer among all these Chinese Mandarin diaspora literati? What kind of environment that you had back then as a Taiwanese writer? Should I translate myself or?
I think.
I guess you told me.
黄老师听得到吗？
好，可以。
我把问题问一遍，如果翻得不好的地方，那么请各位再说。他说他是黄老师的一位大粉丝，从中学开始呢就开始看黄老师的作品。黄老师的这个写的这些故事呢，让他大开眼界。尤其是在当时呢，大家看的这些文学作品，多半是用国语来写的这些作家，像白先勇、像张爱玲、像朱天心这些作者的作品看的比较多。那么黄老师的作品呢，让他觉得说，这个台湾文学有一个新的可能性。那么不只是就是像这些用国语写作的作家他们的作品而已。那么在当时呢，他想要问的就是说，身为一个台语的作家或是台湾的作家，当时您年轻的时候，这种写作方式应该算是比较非主流的。那么刚才的这些用国语写作作家，应该算是比较主流的。那么在当时，身为一个非主流的这种作家，有什么样的感想？有没有做过什么？
关于他前书就是说是像台湾就是天津那种作家，那对老师您是用台语写这种作品，可以
是。
想不到老师对就是当作为非主流作家让他们
哦，我写的，因为我的写作就是现实主义的社会写实。那么我写的台湾大多数的一个小人物，他们都没有受过学校国语的一个训练，所以他们都用自己的一个 local language 地方的方言呢在讲话。那么以小说方面呢，说是好好去写他的一个要刻画的人的一个人性。那么小说最重要可能最难翻译的，古浩文先生翻译的最有把握的，也就是对话的那个语言才不好翻译。为什么呢？我那一些都是台湾的乡下的农夫或者是老奶奶，他们在讲话只会语言，那么语言跟文字不一样的。小说它 几类啊，一个就是 narration 叙述的，一个就是内心的语言，一个是肢体的 act。那么最难比文字呢更，比如说啊，讨厌，好，那就可以从各种大小的国语字典里面呢去看，讨厌是什么意思？就是嫌弃、不喜欢。可以分作非常多的一个 level 层次哈，比如说我现在很小声的说讨厌，我也可以更大声的说讨厌，我也更生气的说讨厌，我也可以把桌子关掉的说讨厌，但你说那个女生常常讨厌。那你看，讨厌在，那么特别是一个 local 的一个 language 啊，它常常用一些谚语啊、俗谚，那种很有 nuance 的、有弦味。现在就是刚刚说的，我是现实主义的社会写实。我在写的那一些人不会讲国语，那么他们这个对话的时候，我把他的国语写的标标准准的这样的一个对话的话呢，已经那个语言已经没有生命了，所以不是主流不主流，我才不管那个什么主流的，我是很忠于我应该怎么表达的那样的一个事，我忠于那一些小人物的一个心声，OK。
好，我们先翻译一下啊。
So regarding my writing, I would regard myself as a social realist writer. And the characters that I write about are the little people, the man in the street in Taiwan. These people are usually uneducated, and they don't speak Mandarin very well, or they are unable to speak Mandarin, so they speak in their local vernacular. Now, when writing my novels, I believe what is most important is to describe human nature. And when you're trying to describe human nature, the hardest thing to translate is the dialogues. And in this respect, I believe Professor Goldblatt did really well. Now, the dialogue is the hardest thing to translate in language, especially when you're dealing with the language of farmers and elderly people in the countryside. These are people who know only how to speak the vernacular and do not know anything about formal or written language. In most novels, you have a combination of narration and dialogue, and between the two, I believe the dialogue is more important because dialogue is language that comes straight from the heart. Now, dialogues are really hard to translate, as I mentioned before. It's distinct from written language, and let me give you an example to show what different nuances you can have in dialogue. In Taiwanese or Mandarin, you can have the expression 讨厌, which if you look it up in a Chinese dictionary, it will tell you that 讨厌 means to dislike. But let me say 讨厌 to you in 4 different ways. And then Huang goes on to say it softly, and then a little louder, and even louder, and then in a very loud, emotional way. And he is saying that when you adjust the loudness of this 讨厌, it can mean different levels of emotions and different things. Even though the word means dislike, when a girl says 讨厌 to her boyfriend, it can actually be meant in a flirting kind of way. So that brings us back to the main point, which is that in my novels, I use the local language, which are full of colloquialisms and idioms that are very nuanced. I am a social realist, so what concerns me most is the depiction of my characters and the language that they use. These characters do not speak Mandarin, so I don't care so much about I don't care so much about writing their dialogue in standard Mandarin, because if I did so, then I would not be true to my characters. The dialogue would be lifeless. So it's not an issue of whether I am mainstream or not. The main issue, the most important thing, I believe, is to be loyal to my characters.
Okay, thank you. I think since Huang Chun-ming has been exerting himself, maybe we should, give him a rest and let him just enjoy the rest of the Q&A. Maybe we could pass it over to Howard and open the room for questions to Howard. And if there's questions about Taiwanese literature, well, Howard and Sylvia, of course, both of you. And if there's general questions about Taiwanese literature, about translation, or about Huang Chun-ming in general, please have those too. Maybe you want to say a few words for Huang Chun-ming just to let him know what.
OK， 王老师，那我们现在就让您休息一下。我们现在看看，就是观众有没有什么问题想要请教这个葛老师的。
好。要否？
So,
请教。
any other questions?
回去有没有想？
现在是交给我们
哪有？
Sorry, I don't mean to hog the microphone, but I do have another question for Howard, and it's about the translation part. That you are very prolific translator and a very good translator for that matter. But the selection of your translation is very wide. I mean, you obviously translate many China writers like Mo Yan or Huang, and then you also translate Taiwanese writers like Huang Chun-ming or Chun-ming. So I'm just very, very curious that what is your selection criteria on what work that you want to translate, and what made you think that, what made you decide that this piece of work speaks to you, and then you want to pick it up and translate that novel?
The selecting process is very complicated. I thought you were going to ask why I didn't translate more Taiwanese literature than I did, and it's a legitimate question. But I have translated or been co-translator of, I think, 10 works from Taiwan, which is rather a lot. No one else, I don't expect that there are that many translations of Taiwanese literature by all the other translators. And I do it because I love translating Taiwanese literature, starting with Chun-ming. I like to say that I only translate things that I fall in love with, but if that were the case, I'd be spending a lot of time looking around wondering if the next lovable work is coming soon, because not everything speaks to a translator in the same way as that the idea speaks to an author, to a writer. We take on jobs that are already essentially completed. It's a finished work. And as a translator, while I translate books in the broadest macro sense, really I translate words and sentences. I've gotten to the point now where I frequently don't even read a novel before I translate it. And I found that a number of other translators are like that, because they don't have to know what happened. All they have to know is what the words say, which complicates the issue, because sometimes I'll start working on a novel and find out I don't like it. If I don't like it, it makes the translation a lot harder. Oftentimes, I spend more time cursing an author than I do translating an author. And unfortunately, Sylvia sits in a desk across from me, and she'll say, "There he goes again, cursing an author." So sometimes we translate works because authors come to us, sometimes because editors come to us, sometimes because agents come to us, sometimes because a friend recommends it. Ultimately, there are a number of considerations. One of them is you have to like it. But even if you don't, you can still translate it if you think it's worthy of translation. And even if you think that this is not a work that fits the way you write. I've often said that after 10 books by Mo Yan, I think I could just put it into, I could close my eyes and translate, almost. Because I'm so familiar with the style. And then I get another writer who writes in a totally different style, I have to translate it into a totally different style. Sometimes that's really, really difficult. But the final answer is, I have to take on a job, particularly at my age, looking, for the second half of my life, for example, I'm going to have to probably choose fewer words that I don't like, simply because I have to keep active. And I think there are fewer and fewer words, both in Taiwan and China, that I consider worthy of translation. So the selection process is thinning out a bit. I'm afraid that's a longer answer than you needed for that.
Oh, no, that was a lot of answer.
Any other questions? Let me follow up on that question. Sylvia, I always wonder, as a translator, in a way you have tremendous power, right? Because, especially when it comes to something like literature from Taiwan, where there's very little available, it's really, you the translator who picks a word or who presents a word, who in a way has the power to present Taiwan to a readership, right? We pick up a book and we read it, of course, with a literary value, but we also kind of expect to learn something about Taiwan, Taiwanese society. When you translate or when you pick words, are you kind of aware of this power? Is there something of Taiwan that you wish a Western audience, an American audience would take away from it? Is that a consideration that you have, or is it something else that drives your choices?
That's actually something I think translators for Taiwanese and in larger sense Chinese literature have to deal with all the time. I guess coming with my background as a scholar of modern and contemporary Chinese literature, I sincerely hope that readers of the English translation can come to a novel because its literary value. It's very well written, its use of language and the creation of image are just superb. That is the ideal situation. But unfortunately, a lot of readers come into Chinese literature to learn about something. So a Chinese novel, is, for the longest time, is still at a stage of serving a kind of sociological function or pedagogical function to teach people about Chinese society and to teach people about Taiwanese society. So I think particularly with Taiwan, I and we are often caught in that crossroad between having to show what Taiwan is all about and wishing to be able to showcase Taiwanese writers in their best. So that has always been a problem for us. And I recently, I'm going to go back to the earlier question about selection. One thing Howard didn't mention is the selection process also includes publication possibility. For many years, Howard and then later with me, we were always happy to pick up a Chinese novel, translate a portion and give it to an agent, and an agent go out and look for a publisher. And for some reason, when you get into the 21st century, it became much more difficult to do that. Sometimes we had 3 or 4 novels out there and nobody responded with positive. They simply don't respond. They don't even tell you, no, we don't want this novel. You just silence. So increasingly, we both feel that if we are going to translate a novel, we have to have a publisher first. To translate a novel 400 or 500 pages, going out, receiving no responses, really getting to us. So I was very happy to have Liang's Niren accepted by Columbia University Press, and that is a novel that's been talked about a lot. So I'm very happy that it's been picked up, and so people can appreciate Liang's writing. And at the same time, it teaches people something about Taiwanese society, Taiwanese history. So in a way, it kind of covers both purpose of translation.
If I may, because my answer to your question was really not very good, so I'm going to say something. One of the things I think is worth thinking about